The Australian Meat Board presents a film in the series Meat Makes the Meal. Number 1, make the most of your roast. The traditional roast of beef or lamb is one of the most enjoyable of meat dishes, whether for everyday or special occasion. It's also one of the easiest to prepare and serve. But there are a few simple points well worth following which will ensure the very best results. Let's join Miss Barbara Lynch of the Sydney County Council's Home Management Service, who is here to show just how to make the most of your roast. Barbara Lynch.
Hello, I'm going to tell you about the dry roasting of meats. Dry roasting is perhaps the oldest method of cooking meat known to man. In early times, he took a piece of meat and impaled it on a spike and roasted it over the open fire. When it comes to roasting, you can choose any cut of lamb, either the shoulder or the loin or the leg. And with beef, this is a different matter. The age of the beast has some bearing on the tenderness of the meat and many other factors as well. And it is a good idea to have a talk with your butcher when you are choosing the cuts of meat that you are going to use for dry roasting. Now I want to make 4 main points about the successful cooking of a roast. Firstly, use a meat rack to keep the meat up out of the pan, and the heat will circulate evenly right round the meat as it roasts. Secondly, use a moderate oven temperature. Thirdly, use a meat thermometer. This ensures that you get the meat cooked exactly the way you like it. And lastly, remember to allow the roast to rest a little while or stand before you begin to carve it. The baking dish needs to be big enough to take the roast that you're going to cook. It needs to be deep enough so that any of the juices and fats that run away from the meat can be collected, and you won't spill any of it if and when you have to move the dish. Most important, however, is the rack for the meat to stand on. This ensures that the meat is held up and away from the bottom of the baking dish and out of the pan juices, so that it enables the heat to circulate freely around the meat as it roasts. Of course, there's an exception to every rule, and if the meat is still on the bone keeps the meat up and away from the bottom of the dish, so you can dispense with the roasting rack. This rib roast is a perfect example. On the other hand, the rolled rib roast certainly does need the rack to keep it up out of the pan juices, as does the leg of lamb, which we're going to be using for the rest of the demonstration. Now, preparing the meat for roasting, we'll assume that your butcher has prepared it ready for the oven. It is generally accepted that salt on a cut meat surface tends to draw out the juices and make the meat somewhat drier. So we keep salt away from all these cut surfaces, but pepper or any other spice that you care to use can be rubbed all over these surfaces and the fat. Rosemary and garlic are 2 popular spices that can be either rubbed over the surface of the meat or tucked into little slits in the fat. Always place the roast on the rack with the fat side uppermost. This means that during the cooking, the fat will melt and run down, doing any basting necessary quite automatically. If the joint has reasonable fat cover, there won't be any need for you to baste it at all during cooking. If it is lean, then there may be some need for a light basting towards the end of the cooking period. I have prepared the vegetables for roasting, and as the oven is on, we might as well think about economizing and cook vegetables at the same time. But they don't take as long to cook. Be ready to put the vegetables into the oven about 1 hour before the time you expect to take the meat out. And now we're ready for the oven. It's a good idea to preheat your oven to the temperature you have decided upon, and I want to stress that a moderate oven temperature is most essential when roasting meat. 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit is the best temperature. And if you're thinking of baking at a higher temperature, you won't gain anything at all, not even time. You will lose more weight from the joint during cooking and end up with a drier, less palatable roast. The pan drippings will be burnt or at least dried up, and these should be the basis for your gravy making later. The roasting pan too will be difficult to wash up because those pan juices will be burnt on, and just think of a messy oven to clean up later on. In calculating the cooking time for a well-done roast, and most people prefer lamb well done, allow 30 minutes for each 500 grams or half kilogram. To be exact, you should use a meat thermometer to tell you when the meat is done. A meat thermometer is an instrument used to measure the internal temperature of a piece of meat. This temperature is the measure of how well the meat is done, and for lamb to be cooked, we need an internal temperature of 83 degrees Celsius. Most meat thermometers are marked to show the correct cooked temperatures for various meats so that you don't have to remember the exact figure in degrees. About the time we estimate the roast to be done, let's take a reading with the meat thermometer. Place the tip of the thermometer into the centre of the thickest part of the meat. Don't let it touch the bone, because if it does, it may give us a false reading. Rest the roast for 20 to 30 minutes before carving and serving. For this resting period, place the roast in a warm place. A warming drawer really is ideal, but I'm going to use the grill compartment under the oven for resting the joint. This resting period need not necessarily be waste time. In fact, you'll probably be very glad of it to finish roasting the vegetables, make the gravy, and do many other odd jobs. And I'd like to take this opportunity to show you the results of a little trial we've conducted, offstage as it were, to show you the difference between roasting meats at high temperatures and moderate temperatures. We cooked 2 legs from the same lamb. They were both exactly the same weight before cooking. One was cooked at 180 degrees Celsius and the other at 220 degrees Celsius. The difference in weight is obvious, and in fact, the joint cooked at the high temperature now weighs only 9/10 as much as that cooked at recommended temperatures. The weight loss represents moisture driven out of the meat, and therefore the overheated meat would taste less succulent. When we recommend this resting period for the meat, people often ask, won't the meat get cold? Well, in actual fact, this is what happens. The outside of the meat is very hot. It registers about 180 degrees Celsius. And this heat travels along towards the center of the roast. Admittedly, the outside gets a little cooler, but this doesn't really matter. It's a good thing. When you carve meat, if it's too hot, you'll find that you lose a lot of the valuable juices. The little meat cells burst and the juices run away as you carve it thinly. When a roast is thoroughly rested, the temperature of the meat will be even throughout. And when it is carved and served onto hot plates with hot vegetables and beautiful hot gravy, it certainly will be most enjoyable to eat, and it won't be cold.
Let's cover again quickly what Barbara Lynch has shown us. 1. When dry roasting, make sure that heat can circulate right round the meat. Put it on a rack unless its own bone structure serves to keep the meat away from the bottom of the pan. 2. Use moderate oven temperatures. High heat is not quicker, but will cause excessive weight loss of the meat. It will also dry up the pan juices and make cleaning the pan and the oven much harder. 3. Use a meat thermometer to be certain that the roast is cooked just the way you want it. 4. Rest the roast for about 20 minutes in a warm place before carving. Make use of this time to finish cooking the vegetables, make the gravy, and complete other odd jobs. And finally, enjoy your next roast.